Hello, friends. Chris Corsi here, president of Thrive Today, and I want to welcome you to the Relational Skills in Real Life podcast. I'm glad you're here. Today is the first in a very special series on using skills to bring reconciliation. That's right. How do we use relational skills to heal pain that God's people often have for various reasons? Sometimes we're injured by other people in the church, sometimes leaders say and do things that hurt and wound other people. Sometimes we have a lot of issues with God because of our treatment and by God's people. So, friends, this is a very important topic, and it's one that I can relate with a lot because this has been also part of my journey. So, we're going to look at what happens when non-believers and even believers get hurt and injured by Christians, and they can put this hurt onto God. They feel that this behavior reflects God's character and God's personality. So, understandably so, they want to run the other direction. They want nothing to do with God, with the church, and with other believers and Christians. Their brain equates God, scripture, and believers as unsafe, something to avoid at all costs. And friends, it can be really hard to separate our pain from God's character and God's presence. Anytime God's representatives cause harm, this pushes people away. Anytime God's institutions cause harm, it pushes people far from church and makes it hard for them to truly see God for who He is, apart from their wounds and apart from their pain. In fact, oftentimes a lot of people feel like God has endorsed this behavior. Therefore, God must be avoided. They can't trust God. They can't have vulnerabilities and turn to God. So running away feels like survival, especially when the harm comes from leaders in the church. And friends, I've heard too many stories, too many train wrecks where this has happened. And this creates a perfect storm where people's pain gets directed at God. And what makes this worse is when God's people justify this behavior, their toxic behavior, their hurtful behavior in some way, or they even defend their actions without taking any responsibility for their actions. This is profoundly damaging. You see, it's holy ground when we're allowed to sit with people who've been injured by the church in some way or been injured by God's people in some way. And this holy ground requires great wisdom and care as we join people and sit with them as they share their vulnerabilities and hurts. They share what happened to them and how they were hurt in some way. So we want to tread lightly and we want to use validation and comfort. These are return to joy skills to sit with people while they process their pain. So one of the worst things we can do in these moments is to minimize their distress, to minimize what they're feeling. Oftentimes, where this process goes south is well-intentioned believers try to use information to solve what is deep attachment pain. And we know that information doesn't heal attachment pain. It's kind of like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It just doesn't work well. And in track three, we spend a lot of time helping people understand the five kinds of pain and using solutions for those five kinds of pain. But level one is what we call level one pain is attachment pain. It's subcortical, it's very deep. So information doesn't touch that part of the brain. But there are some things that we can do. And that's what we're going to look at here. What can we do? How can we sit with people who are hurting and suffering, who've been injured by other believers? And sometimes people use words, and other Christians will respond to some of this pain by saying, oh, this wasn't real Christianity. Don't blame God for people, or you just need to forgive. These kinds of things and statements are only going to minimize the pain that people feel. And it could be profoundly painful when people say this. Basically, the listeners hear, your pain is inconvenient. It's on you. And it only confirms the original wound that Christians are a source of distress. And friends, when God called me to ministry years ago, I can remember that I knew God was calling me, and I had no doubt that God wanted me to go into ministry. But one of the problems I had is I didn't know how to stay myself while changing old patterns and correcting behaviors that I knew God wanted me to lay down and to stop doing that because they weren't honoring God. So I knew that God was calling me to live in a holy way, to live in a way that's honoring to God. But a lot of my experiences up to that point with other believers were not really what I'd say like life-giving. There wasn't a lot of joy there. I had some of my own Christian wounds interacting with other people, and didn't have a lot of examples that I really liked. Like, hey, I'd like to be like this person. I love how they're confident and they're joyful and they're peaceful. I didn't have a lot of those examples. So I had to be honest with God one day. I said, God, I want to follow you. I want to be who you want me to be. But I have to admit, Lord, if following you is being like some of the people that I've encountered, I don't know how to do that. And I'll never forget, clear as day, God's grace, God's mercy showed up. And I had a thought come into my mind when I was praying about this. And I felt like Jesus was saying, Chris, I'm not asking you to be like them. I'm asking you to be like me. And something deep happened in my brain when these thoughts came to mind. I felt like Jesus was giving me permission to follow him. I don't have to be like some of the broken vessels that I had witnessed. I didn't have to be like other people that I had, some wounds with. He was asking me to be like him. And that shifted something pretty big in my life. And from that point on, I said, okay, God, I want to be who you want me to be, and I want to be like you. So I'm going to look at your word. I'm going to learn more about you. And eventually I did start meeting other Christians who had maturity, who could reflect God's heart rather well and relationally with love and with peace and with joy. So that changed my life, interacting with God. So when we sit with people, as I said, this is holy ground. And relational skills are very important as we join people as they're processing some of their hurts. We want to use skill 11 and skill 12, which is returning to joy and staying our relational selves, to join people who have strong emotions and deep hurts. We want to grieve with people who have been hurting, right? We use VCR, validation, comfort, and repattern. What I like to call R is return to joy, so that we validate what people feel, their pain and their emotions. We put words to what we see and what we hear, and we validate them. And then we offer comfort, which is inviting them to verbalize what do they need, what would be helpful while they navigate this terrain and process these feelings. So VCR creates connection so that people feel seen, heard, and understood. It actually helps keep their brain in relational mode and out of enemy mode because they feel like someone is with them and someone sees them and someone is with them and someone values them. So VCR really invites people to process their pain, and it helps them be able to learn how to return to joy from what they're experiencing and feeling and processing. So we sit with people and we join their sufferings without trying to fix it. We want to be like Job's friends in the beginning of the story where they sat with Job for 7 days and 7 nights without saying a word. They were grieving. They put dust on their heads. They tore their robes. They were grieving with their friend. This was before they started trying to use information to fix it, which didn't go very well. So we don't have to feel like we have to defend God and try to use information to bring resolution for people, right? Information just often minimizes the pain that people are feeling. We want to value the process of repair over image management. When believers often have fear around their image and reputation, it only puts pressure into the situation, and that they want to put out a fire rather than relationally repair and join people as they process their pain. So we want to be very sensitive to that. We want to intercede and join people in their sufferings, offering comfort and God's hospitality, to love people and to love them well while they put words and process what they're feeling. So the reality is many people who run from God aren't really rejecting God. They're rejecting, right, this broken example of who they think God is. They're processing who is God and who is he not. And so they're trying to figure that out. So they're really avoiding what they think is God. But as they begin to learn who God is and who he is not, it's a profoundly healing, redemptive process. So our job is to stay with people and keep our relational circuits on while they slip in and out of enemy mode, and we can use validation and comfort to be with them. So we want to stay relational, love people well, care for them, serve them, listen, and walk with them. And of course, along the way, we use skill 13, which is seeing what God sees. And we follow Jesus's example, who only did what he saw the Father doing, who only said what he heard the Father saying. So they were synchronized, and we want to follow Jesus's example and say, Jesus, what are you doing right now? What are you doing in all of this? How can I emulate you and follow you while I sit and love on this person? So we can also use skill two. We can quiet ourselves anytime we feel anxious thoughts or feelings arise. We don't have to defend God. He's big enough to defend himself. Our job is to reflect his heart and be faithful to tend the garden as we join people in their hurts and in their sufferings. So friends, relational skills are a core part of this journey and this process. And I want to encourage you to learn more about these relational skills that can give you the strength and the clarity that you need to be your relational self to show up when you walk and enter into people's stories. So we have a Skill 13 God Sight Habit Builder course, really good at practicing getting God's perspective. And we also have a Tools for Navigating Emotions Return to Joy course. I want to invite you to check those resources out. We even have a conflict course that you could learn more about at thrivetoday.org. And friends, it's my prayer, my heartfelt prayer, that this is the start of something good for you today.